Welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Zone. I'm your co-host, Tom Spitalere, and Bob's here with us. Hey, Bob, how we doing?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. The Paranormal Zone is set up so we can hear people's views on the paranormal, UFO, UAB phenomena, Bigfoot. We've had some great Bigfoot researchers on, and different oddities of New England. Today we're going to take a deep dive into another oddity, and that's stones. Anywhere in New England or across the world, there are stones. And there are stone structures that we really don't know what they are. You know, we're lucky enough here to see some of these stone structures, aren't we, Bob?
Yeah, you got Stonehenge right here in New Hampshire and a lot of other stone buildings type things all over New England, frankly.
Correct. So, stones, during the 1930s and 40s, people started uncovering these structures as they cleared lands for farms and, up north the woods. There were estimated 250,000 miles of stone walls originally. Wow. Some can be explained of structures and others, well, they can't be. Some structures were built to align with the stars and the planets. They stand in new megaliths and calyces on the Mars. Few stones, tables, and altars have been seen in the area, too. Some of these structures were built by medieval or Irish monks. Could be the Phoenicians, could be Vikings, could be Native Americans, or some say Old English builders that were known as root cellars. You've probably seen a few of those, right, Bob?
Right, yeah, you see a lot of those in New England where they would put their crops after they were picked to not only get them out of the elements, but to preserve them a little, I guess.
Right. Free Northeast. Yeah.
One of the things, Tom, that I'm always interested in, how do you carbon date these stone structures? I mean, right now, using carbon dating that goes all the way back to Egyptian times, they could actually come within probably 1,000 years or so of something original. Can that be done with these rock structures?
They can be, and some of these have been carbon dated.
Yep.
Just so you know, the amount of concentration of these shaped stones in New England is incredible. Okay? Yeah. There's 105 locations in Mass, 62 in Connecticut, 51 in New Hampshire, 41 in Vermont, 12 in Rhode Island, and 4 in Maine. And I'm betting the size of Maine, there's probably more that have never been found.
Right, exactly.
And some of these could be the ancient travelers. I mean, right here in good old Merrimack Valley, where, you live too, Bob,
Right.
Where you live, Bob.
Tom,
where you live, Bob.
I think one of the great examples of these stone structures is Easter Island. For those people that are interested in this, when you look at the structures, these stone structures on Easter Island, they weighed in excess of 100 tons. I mean, they weren't rocks just placed. And they proved that Easter Island, Tom, those rocks had to be imported. They could not have been taken from the island itself. They didn't have those kind of volcanic rocks on the island. So when you think back, 1,000 years or plus, how did they get these 100-ton structures, not only from one place to another, but then managed to get them inland and stood up? The carving is another whole, interesting thing on how they carve it. But I can see if they were laying down how they could do that. They built the pyramids, right? So
correct.
That's not out of the realm of possibility. But then to lift these 100-ton statues into the air and then set them into the ground. It's mind-boggling.
Oh, no, it's totally mind-boggling. And Easter Island's a good one, but we talk about Easter Island. We talk about America's Stonehenge, which is right up the street from all of us here in the Merrimack River Valley. And,
Right.
These structures all line up. America's Stonehenge, English Stonehenge, and downtown Tripoli all line up with ley lines. So who's really building these structures?
And why?
And why? Exactly. I mean, they frequently traveled upstream using the Merrimack, the Thames River in Connecticut, and the massive rivers of Vermont that, all end up in Rhode Island. These ancient travelers. So, I mean, it's interesting how these things actually, transform themselves. I mean, early New England settlers found these structures in the woods, and they didn't know what they were from. Were they native? Right. Were they, were they Phoenician? Were they some Irish, Celtic group? Or some Old English group? Vikings? Vikings, right. There's a Viking buried in Westford called the Westford Knight. That's a Viking. It's a Portuguese knight, but there's been Vikings all the way down this river.
Right.
So it is interesting.
Just like the pyramids, when you align the pyramids with the stars,
mm-hmm.
they are 1 centimeter off or something ridiculous small number like that. So when you look at these kind of structures, Tom,
right.
and think that they align themselves almost perfectly with some other structure multiple miles away, you have to ask yourself, what technology what kind of technology could they possibly have used 700-800 years ago to get that so perfect?
Right. I mean, no one really knows. Or
correct.
There's that theory out there, could have been UFO alien related. We don't know.
No, you don't know. But one thing you do know, that the technology to do that did not exist today.
No, it did not. No.
It may exist today. I'm not saying we couldn't take a compass point and go out 100 miles from point A to B and hit that target within a reasonable, error margin, right?
Right.
But we definitely know the technology 500, 1,000 years ago was not there to do it.
No.
So the question you have to ask yourself is, how the heck did they get that done?
Mm-hmm. I mean, early New England settlers found these structures. It was interesting. In 1654, John Winthrop received a letter from John Pidgeant of Springfield, Mass., and who said he heard of a stone structures in Walking, newly and recently discovered near the Pequot, near Pequot, which is out there in western, down this way, yep. Southeastern. Yep. So, I mean, these stone structures have been here long before, Havel was settled in 1641, long before these structures were here. I mean,
right.
You have the Upton Stone Chambers in Upton, Mass., located near Worcester. That stone structure is 14 feet entrance, tunnel, ends with a beehive room with 12 feet dome. Beehive room is 11 feet. The stone slope sits at the top, built by Irish monks.
Yeah.
And then in 1989, two astronauts concluded that people used chambers between 700 and 750 AD to study Pleistocides. Around 620, they viewed the summer solstice.
Right.
In 2015, geological surveys estimated a structure built between 1350 and 1625 based on the OSC samples. No Native American artifacts were ever found around the Upton Chamber, but they date this thing back to 1350 to 1625.
Wow.
And, of course, this is something, if you live in the area, you could go visit for free. It's at the Upton Heritage Park, 18 Elm Street.
Right.
So that's just
Right.
one of the structures, And then
Yeah.
you have the Herodo stone structure in Alton in Old Town, Maine. That's where the red paint people of Maine settled that area 7,000 years ago. Today it's known as Herodo Wildlife Refuge and Wetland Preserve. Archaeologists discovered a 7,000-year-old discovered a 7,000-year-old rock form along the Wabanaki Trail. Now, was that native or was that something else?
Yeah.
Among them buried were they found grave sites buried over there, at least 18 curious stone piles clearly made by humans at 6.5 feet in diameter and a half a feet, inch and a half high. And no one knows who built those either.
Correct. And then you look at, Tom, the resources and tools that were needed to, extradite the rock that was needed, then to carve that rock down into a carving of some sort, and so on and so on. So just the tools alone to do that, you question, what did they use? I mean, these are hard rock. You don't separate them and make designs out of them, frankly, with wooden pallets. I mean, you have to have other technology. My opinion is, frankly, that a lot of this is alien based creations. Now, maybe it's because they needed landing points. Maybe it was because another life form in our solar system used that as guidance points or something. But right now, I just don't. I think there's too many questions to say, how did they form these? It goes back to the pyramids. You and I have talked about this a lot. With supercomputers today, an architect will tell you there is not a computer on planet Earth that can recreate the construction of the pyramids to the exact number that the Egyptians did.
No.
Now you can argue about, well, they had thousands of laborers. We all can agree to that. Okay, there's no doubt. But they still didn't have the technology to line this up, and then the actual building of it. And when people want to argue about that or disagree with me, then somebody come forward and tell me how it was done.
Right. Wouldn't it be nice to know, huh?
Yeah, come on the air and say, no, I think I have the answer. It was done this way. They have just uncovered in Egypt, in the last 30 days, that there is a whole city underneath the three major pyramids.
Yes, I saw that. I read a quick brief on that one.
Right. They are now going to find things in those chambers and that all the tunnels and everything that's under there, because it appears at this point that these pharaohs were buried under these pyramids in their chambers, but actually had built an escape hatch, maybe to the netherworld. I'm not sure where it goes. We'll probably find out in another couple of years. But they actually felt they needed to build this under the pyramids to go somewhere. Again, where does this technology come from to shore this up with this big pyramid sitting on top of these tunnels?
Right, and those things are very heavy.
Extremely heavy.
So,
extremely heavy. I don't even know the weight of a pyramid, but
no,
it's all rock-based, right? I mean, it's there's no plastic in it, I guess is where I'm coming from. So it's all rock-based going that high up and with those dimensions.
And it stayed.
Yeah, it's lasted thousands of years, and I don't know. But back to rock structures again, I think that our audience has to understand also that as time evolves over thousands of years, these structures get covered up through wind and sand and dirt and trees and everything else. So there are probably many, many more out there that have yet to be discovered.
Oh, I know there are more out there, and it's going to be interesting to see as we discover these things,
right?
What's going on. I mean, then you got in Groton, Connecticut, you got Gungy Swamp, which is an archaeological site there, And again, some of the structures thought to be Native American, used for ceremonial functions. The colonial settlers built other structures like this for root cellars, and birthing chambers. But some of the features go further back than that.
Sure.
And actually Gungy Swamp is called the Calendar Chamber because it's built. Archaeologists suspect that the colonists originally used this for storage and for nearby the Tanbach Mill, but it might have been used for storage. But what was it used before that?
Right.
It allows a shaft of sunlight to fall directly onto a smaller chamber with a longer structure. Gungy Swamp is a preserve. It stands on private land, and it can be toured virtually through the division of. They're really protecting this, the Pequot Boss Nature Center. And then not too far from here, in Acton, Mass. Now we're going to get to this beehive, the other stone structures. So don't worry, Bob. We're going to talk about that beehive chamber. That's, in out your way and this. But here's another one in Acton, Mass. Acton's not that far from the New Hampshire border. It's in this Neshoba Brook Conservatory area, known as Potato Cave. Residents believe it's a root cellar, but in 2006, excavation found evidence of stones and food from the 18th and early 19th century. Some say it was built before the colonizations, and some say it was built by railroad workers in the 19th century.
Huh.
But this is right off of North Acton on Route 27, heading towards Westford.
Yeah, that's interesting because, again, as you look at the wooded areas in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire, at least, some of the rock walls that you see go way deep down in because they used to mark farmland. So the farmers knew what each plot was. But they also may have represented a colony of some sort, and that was their surrounding structure to that colony.
Right.
And you hear a lot of rock wall experts say that there is definitely some of these walls that were a whole compound, not just a marker of land.
Correct. And, like this one, this is a perfect example. Queen's Fort and the Queen's Bed Chamber in Exeter, Rhode Island.
Yep.
Archaeologists and historians associate this fort and stone walls with John, a colonial mason who may have been Narragansett or English. And he built these structures as a fort to protect King Philip in 1675-78 during the war. Colonists did attack the fort during the war, and within the fort there's a 6-foot chamber with a 7-foot wide ceiling and a sand floor. One belief is the fort was built for the Narragansett Queen, Manitouk or Quannapain, and during King Philip's War. She moved out after the war, where she died in private. Some say John and her were lovers. Many archaeologists also have this site. They found a strong Native American culture, and this is protected by the Rhode Island Historical. Access through these trails in Exeter, Rhode Island, surround the property. So it's something you could go visit.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar, Tom, with the stone structure in Rhode Island. That's the tower.
I know a little bit about the tower.
Yeah, I lived there for 10 years, visited it a few times, but I really never deep dived into the history of that. And I know it's been a mystery in Rhode Island for a lot of years, whether they have solved it lately or not, I don't know. But it was really a mystery when I lived there, who built it, why it was built, what its usage was.
Right. Let me just look at my notes because I got to rebrain my brain on that one. I didn't really bring that one up. If I remember correctly, and they got that tied to the founder of Rhode Island, John Smith.
John Smith, correct.
The Newport Tower. That's what it's called.
Yes, that's it.
All right. All right.
You know, was it an observation tower of some sort? Could very well have been a tower to protect the community that allowed people to get up a little higher to see if there was any attacks or, you know, that type of thing. I never really ever got a definition of what they think it was there for.
Right. Well, some of these towers. What's going on here? I'm having a little trouble here. Newport Tower. Why won't it come up? Some of these structures that are these towers, right? You know,
right.
They say are built by this, built by that. Again, we really don't know who built these towers.
Right.
And what their purposes were, because you got to remember, we've had issues in New England. The natives had issues. Everybody had issues back then.
Correct.
And they built these stone structures, and some say, oh, that's Viking. Oh, that's this. Oh, that's nothing. You know, and that's why we have... I don't know why it's not coming up. Stone.
I mean, I think, Tom, while you're looking that up, this goes back to, you know, what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and that's migration back thousands of years.
Right.
I don't think anybody has ever proven, in my opinion at least, I know we're going to hear from some astronomers and other folks like that that's not true, but I don't know if anybody's ever proven just how old the Earth really is.
No, I don't think they have.
You hear reports it's 170 million years old. Then you hear reports it's 75 million years old. But it depends on, we understand inherently that the land mass has changed over millions of years. There's no doubt about that. War has opened up, separated countries and everything else. So when people say, well, how did somebody who lived 2,000 years ago get from point A to point B?
Right.
Well, if point A to point B was a solid landmass at the time, one person may have not walked there, but generations may have.
Right.
So to say, well, it would never be the Vikings, it would never be this group or that group, they're too far away, I don't buy that analysis, frankly.
No, I never did either.
Yeah, I know you don't. And I think that if we had the land mass dating back 1 million years ago, I think it would explain a lot to us as to exactly how that took place.
Right.
But
well,
it's very possible that they walked across that far generation over generation over generation.
Right, exactly. So some believe it's a mid-17th century windmill that was there.
Yep.
Some say it's several centuries older and would thus represent evidence of a pre-Columbian transoceanic. Carbon dating shows this belief is incorrect. It is interesting.
Yeah, well, back in that time frame, what they found was that to pulverize crops and stuff like that into what they needed to mix and so forth to eat, that wind could power that kind of a thing. So they had these towers that captured wind coming across, and it pumped up a small valve, if you will, in our terminology, that would crush and pummel all of those different vegetables and everything into cooking dust and stuff like that. And that may very well have been one of those. When people say, well, when you look inside, there's nothing there. Well, of course, because the wood, ropes, and everything else have deteriorated a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, you have a structure that survived because of its texture of rock, but the inside was wood and ropes and pulleys and stuff that would have deteriorated over 1,000 years.
Right. And some say this thing was built in 1677 as an old stone mill. And, of course, it's right near the water, so that could be it, too.
That's correct, yeah. Is it close? Do you know if it's close enough to the water to be some sort of a lighthouse?
It could have been. I mean, carbon dating suggests... Now, carbon dating is going to give you a roundabout, especially with stones.
Sure.
Their 1993 carbon date production of mortar between 1635 and 1698.
Okay. So very old, but more recent than 1,000 years.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's still old.
Yeah.
I mean,
but again, back to something like Easter Island or Stonehenge here in Salem, New Hampshire, or other rock, the Stonehenge. You wonder still the question of how these rocks were moved and put in place and balanced and everything else is mind-boggling to think the technology was not there to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Where is Stonehenge in? I should know this, but
Salem.
I don't. Where?
Salem.
No, I meant Stonehenge.
In England.
England. Is it England or Scotland?
England.
England. So if you look at Stonehenge in England, and you watch any kind of thing on TV about it and everything else, these stones weighed tons and tons and tons. And they're not just, if you're familiar with it, it's not just stones standing straight up. It's stones, and then at the very top of this is more stones.
Correct.
Which means they had to have the leverage capability of getting a multi-ton stone to the top of that structure.
Correct.
I mean, it's mind-boggling to think, how did they do that? I mean, I know that the window, and when the sun sets, the window used to tell them when it was time to plant crops and pick crops, and they could tell when the winter was coming and everything else. I get that by the stars. By then they were becoming educated to that.
Right.
But the structure of it, how they did it, I think is a whole story, Tom, within itself.
Right.
That gets lost in the interpretation of what it was used for.
Oh, yeah, that's what happens all the time.
Right, exactly. Easter Island, again, a great example of what do these represent? I mean, were they some sort of a waypoint later in history for ships, for example, that, just navigated by stars, right?
Right.
And once they saw Easter Island, then they knew approximately where they were. But then you have to buy into the theory that somebody went to all the trouble to put these stone structures on Easter Island for that reason, which would tell me they had to be more educated in navigation than we give them credit for.
Right.
Right? I mean, who would think about that if you weren't seafarers? Right? I mean, so I keep going back to it. I believe it strongly that a lot of this, not all of it, like anything in life, it's never one thing. But I think alien life existed much, much longer and long before we realized. I think it predates Egypt, frankly. Does it go back to biblical times? I don't know. I really don't know. But I just don't think we give that enough thought.
No, I don't think we do, actually. I mean, someone built these structures, all right?
Correct.
And we don't know who built these structures. You got structures here. I mean, they go back.
Yeah. And by the way, again, Easter Island, very few tools have ever been recovered off of Easter Island that would indicate how these stone structures were carved, which again is interesting because did they just take all the tools with them? Did they bury these tools, or in fact, did they not use many tools at all because it was created from something else? Same way with the pyramids. If you go back into the pyramids and look, very few tools have ever been discovered that would justify the kind of carving of these rocks that they had to fit in place like a puzzle. And some of these rocks are airtight.
That is correct.
No ceiling.
Right.
That's how perfect they carved those stones. I mean, using what? We can't recreate it today using diamond head saws.
Nope.
So we think they did this with chisels, and was that accurate? Wow. Okay. It's a conversation that could be had for sure. I encourage our listeners, if this is your background, if you've done these studies, send an email to paranormalnh@yahoo.com and come on the air. I mean, we would love to have you come on here and explain some of these things to us. I have yet to find anybody that is an expert enough to say, no, I'll tell you exactly how it was done, good or bad. I mean, if you believe aliens did it, come on, tell us. But if you believe that the labor force back in that time frame did it, I'd love to hear how.
Oh, I would too, because it really fascinates me looking at these structures and going,
yep.
What and wow.
Yep.
I mean, even the Native Americans had primitive stone tools of the time.
Correct.
So it's correct. Even more interesting.
But when you look at, the American Indian, who is the only original person in the United States that I know of, but if you look at the American Indian, they lived in tents. They built all of their structures out of hides and actual tree limbs and stuff like that. They had very few actual stone structures.
Right. They had stone tools, though. They had a lot of stone tools.
Correct. But somewhere in civilization, at some point, we moved away from stone structures.
Right. Because you couldn't move them as easy. Probably because you couldn't move them as easy.
Or carve them as easy.
Right.
Or connect them into a building as easy. And yet, our ancestors did it somehow.
Yeah, you're right about that, Bob.
When you looked at a Civil War fort or any fort in that area, what was it made of?
Rock.
Well, a lot of it was made of wood.
Yeah, rock and wood. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so it wasn't made of solid stone all the way around. And yet, that's the culture and the environment we came from, that our ancestors built of stone. So again, why? Why did that change? Why didn't Indians build brick housing?
Probably because how long it took compared to the wood.
It could be. Or it could be something as simple, Tom, that they were migrating constantly.
Correct.
And didn't see the value of putting up permanent installations.
Right.
Because, like you said, it took too long to keep building them. So tents went up, tents went down, they moved on again. And I think we would find in history, if we got to the right people, that's probably one of the reasons for that. Because what do we do later in the 19th century? We go back to buildings out of what?
Brick.
Rock.
Stone
Brick,
and block.
mortar.
Yeah.
I mean, anything that you could look at and say is rock, that's what we end up building it off of again. So it kind of went, that whole pendulum swung back again.
And that's what the pendulum does every so many years. It swings back.
It does. It's a cycle. I just make a note, Tom.
Yeah.
I'm glad I got into the brick era and not the tent era. I don't want to live in a tent.
No. And they weren't even the tents of today. Those were animal hide tents. Those were a little different.
Yeah, they were very cold.
Well, you could burn inside. They had fires going and stuff.
they did.
Yeah, yeah.
They did. That was, yeah. I mean, they actually did up a fire going on inside the tent.
Correct.
Because the top of the teepee, if you will, the tent was open, and it was open so the smoke could escape.
Correct.
Right.
And
That's
keep
why
them
they left
warm.
that.
Right. Especially on those
Yeah,
cold New England nights like we went through in February here in New England.
Yeah, and I'm sure that New England is not unique as we look at the United States, but we have more historical data at our fingertips in New England than a lot of other states have. And I'm sure it has to do with migration and what happened, colonies being settled and everything else as the United States grew, because it grew out of the original colonies, the 13 colonies.
Correct.
All the other land in the United States was just woods at the time.
Right.
And that was why a lot of, which you do very well, talk about the wars that took place were more over colonizing new land in the United States. So we have to understand that most of the United States was just undeveloped wooded areas.
Right.
Right? It was really New England with the 13 colonies that started the spread across the United States.
Correct. And, then we go into America's Stonehenge, first dubbed Mystery Hill by William Goodwin until 1982 when it was renamed America's Stonehenge. The name is coined from the 1962 article. Rebranding happened separate this site from the roadside oddities that reinforce the idea of ancient agricultural site. The area named after Stonehenge in England. Radiocarbon has said that America's Stonehenge is roughly 4,000 years old. In 1982, David Stewart Smith, director of the reconstruction of Mystery Hill, found that there was a quarry north of the main site. So they found a rock quarry back there. And they decided to look at the chips, and some of the chips and flukes, there was a lot of them of different stone different stone tools that were broken. Because it's not like today, you're writing with a pencil and you make a mistake. Oops, get that eraser, erase the mistake, and you're done.
Start over again.
Start over. You made a mistake making a stone arrowhead or a flint head or some type of stone tool. That whole thing was gone. Time to start all over again.
So, American Stonehenge here in Salem, New Hampshire, is carbon dated, we think, back 4,000 years ago.
Correct.
Okay. So is there any other evidence of civilization, what civilization was back 4,000 years ago in this area? In other words, have bones been found? Have tools been found? Other sites that have been worked on. Mm-hmm. Is there any other evidence, Tom, that backs up that's 4,000 years old?
Well, there's been a lot of sites of Native American sites that go, Paleolithic and Neolithic, so they go back a bit. But they could build these type of sites? Not really. And, what's interesting, I want to bounce off of this, out near you, one of the many beehives in the area down there is the Danville Beehive.
Yeah.
We went out there.
What is the Danville Beehive?
So the Danville Beehive is an unknown age, origin similar to the structure of America's Stonehenge in Salem. One of the local historians described similar stone structures located on private properties all over the Danville area. So if that is factual, and I believe it is, that area was all once part of Havel when Havel was first settled in 1640. The chamber is a U-shape with an entrance, both walls squared off, large one piece of stone for a ceiling, The left wall and joining the entrance wall on the left, the side is open and squared off again.
Right.
Once, ground cover over the area concealed what it was. There was iron in the ground.
Yeah.
Bill A., the tech manager in Essex County, went out there. We went out looking around, and we ended up getting metal in the sand inside the beehive.
Okay.
So I
what
found
does
that
that
to be
tell
interesting.
you?
Well, that means metal tools were probably used.
Okay.
The person approaching from... And the way this thing was built was even more interesting. You could actually see in 3 different directions when you walked out the door.
Yeah. So let me go back to something you said just a minute ago. You said that it was 4 sides,
Yeah.
rock walls, with a solid one-piece roof.
Right. Correct.
So just give our listeners an idea of the dimensions that stone had to be. So was this a 4x8 structure?
The chamber was
10 by 12?
The chamber was 4 feet wide, 7 feet by 5 feet deep, and 4 feet high.
Okay.
We measured the
So
chamber.
that means that the one-piece rock roof had to be 7 feet by 7 feet?
Yeah, basically.
Okay. I wouldn't even begin to guess the weight of that. But if you and I took a piece of rock and cut it 7 feet by 7 feet, how much do you think it might weigh?
Good question. Very heavy.
Okay. I'll go with very heavy because I have no clue either. Certainly, if you go back to that particular time, what tools could they have used to lift that up and place that on the top of that structure?
Good question. And I really don't have an answer. I have never seen that type of tooling system around, because obviously those tools would have been made out of wood. Carving it and breaking it, they would have had stone tools. But as far as putting this structure into place on top of this roof, the only thing I can see them doing, because it's built into a hill, is a bunch of guys roll the roofing stone and put it on top by setting it over the grass.
Well, yeah, that's a possibility.
Carrying it up the hill,
but,
or rolling it up the hill and rolling it into place.
But I think physics tells us to roll a square object certainly is a lot tougher than rolling a round object.
That is correct.
Right? That's physics, and I'm not a physics major. But so, again, it comes down to how do you transfer weight, that kind of weight, back then. Again, it goes back to the day of saying, how does that happen? Now, if one of our listeners on tonight's podcast says, oh, no, I'm a physics major, I can tell you exactly how they do it, send us an email. I'd love to hear an explanation, frankly.
Oh, I would too. Because some people believe these are indigenous or ceremonial chambers.
Right.
Found large outcropping on the Granville Ledge nearby, connected with stone walls 150 meters long. This is all in the same area.
Right.
So it's interesting.
And I think someday, come maybe May or June, that you and I should go out there and do a live podcast from the Beehive.
We could.
Yeah, a live podcast with cameras, show our listeners exactly what we're looking at and so forth and so on.
So
I find it amazing. I've been there once. Unfortunately, the day I went out there, the weather wasn't very good. But it's certainly on my bucket list to get out there on a better day and spend more time looking at it.
So the radio carbon date of the beehive is
Yeah.
2,871 years old, give or take 140 years.
Yeah, see, so if you looked at that, 2,000 years old, but Stonehenge is 4,000 years old.
Correct.
So American Stonehenge
Predates this.
was there 2,000 years before the beehive.
Correct.
Seems like a long time to me.
It is, and we don't know what was here. I mean, what was here? What built these, beautiful structures? And some of them I mentioned tonight, from Stonehenge, to the Potato Cave,
Yep.
to the stone structures in Vermont. And like I said, we have 105 stone structures in Mass. New Hampshire has 51. So who built all who built these structures? Were they?
Right.
Were they monks?
And why?
Were they Irish, Scottish? Were they alien? What were they? And that's the mystery. And that's why I enjoy going into stone history, because of the mystery.
Yeah, and I think, Tom, that it's our goal, whether it be paranormal, UAPs and UFOs, witchcraft. I have a lot of respect for witches. I think they do a great job for those that don't understand them. I think they're a phenomenal group of people. But all of this is a mystery, and all of us, I think, are just trying to get to the truth. I've said many times in my presentations, as I've heard you say, this is all about finding out the truth, regardless of what the truth is.
Right.
People that think that you and I are all about proving aliens did this is sadly mistaken. I'm not trying to prove aliens did it. I'm trying to prove who did it and why.
Exactly.
So I encourage people that have a dissenting vote here that say, no, you're totally wrong. It's not an argument. It's a conversation. It's an education. So Send us an email at paranormalnh@yahoo.com. And listen, we'll have you on a podcast, and we'll sit back and let you tell your story. This isn't about an argument. This is about educating people, because I believe, Tom, strongly in history, like you're a history major, that if you don't understand history, you're bound to repeat the mistakes.
That is correct.
And God knows you have seen it more than anyone because you majored in it, but we have taken history and made mistakes again and again and again because we don't understand it.
No, and we don't. And, it would be nice to tell the story of what was here. Were they monks?
Correct.
Were they Irish? Were they Druids?
Correct.
We don't know.
That's correct.
We know these structures have been around.
Yeah.
And we know there are similar
really,
structures around.
In order to get there, you have to keep backing up in time till you get back to where there is no more evidence. For example, here's a case where American Stonehenge is 4,000 years old. The beehives are 2,000 years old. Well, you've got a void of 2,000 years in between.
Correct.
So what happened in those 2,000 years? I mean, so are we saying that from 4,000 years ago to 2,000 years later that they gained no more knowledge?
I have a hard time believing that.
I have a hard time believing that, too. But then again, for people like myself who believe it's alien in nature, confuses me, because why would a civilization come to Earth 4,000 years ago, help with the building of these things, and yet 2,000 years later not improve on it?
Exactly. Exactly.
I guess that's what makes it interesting.
Well, no, it's always going to make it interesting. And you got to remember something. We're talking about structures that are 2,000 and 4,000 years old. If it wasn't for the Merrimack River and the Laurentine Ice Glacier, then over 4,000 years ago, the river would have went straight into Boston Harbor. So how did they get these stones? How did they get these stones at Stonehenge?
Correct.
I mean, I could see one location but I can't see the other at all.
Correct.
Because I mean, if they're along the river, that's easy.
Yep.
But if they're not along the river, then where are they running to and from?
Well, even 4,000 years ago, if you looked at maritime shipping, which is another whole industry to look at for history, but did they even have watercraft capable of carrying these kind of stones?
Correct. I mean, because the Native Americans used dugout canoes by cutting down trees. It was called the slash and burn. So they would cut down the trees, which we know they did. Then they used stone tools to carve out the middle of the wood that was burnt and soft. Sharp stone tools. And that's called the slash and burn technique. Now, those boats are heavy. I can't see them loading a 1,000-pound stone into a big tree. And the other thing the natives used would have been birch bark. Now, that's a very light material. But birch bark will probably sink to the bottom of the ocean if you put too many stones in it.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. So you look and say, if these stones, like Easter Island again, if they were transported by water, which back then they only had water transportation on foot, right?
Right.
It was an island, so they didn't drag those stones there. They had to be carried aboard some sort of a floating vessel.
Right.
If you go back 4,000 years ago, what kind of vessels existed that could bring that up the Merrimack?
You know, I have to wonder, to be honest with you. Those big ships weren't going to... I mean, you can navigate the river in places, but the Merrimack is a tidal river. And they would have to known that. So during high tide, without the bridges there, you could get a pretty big ship up just north of the downtown of Haverhill. Nowhere near Stonehenge.
That's correct.
That's a long walk.
Into a brook.
Right. And then it picks up a little. It will have a little bit more near where Bradley's Brook comes in to the river, where Hannah went up to her house after she escaped. But Bradley's Brook does not run into anywhere near. You'd have to go Bradley's Brook and then dump a short ride onto the other river there, Little River. And Little River, once you get out of downtown Haverhill, you're not putting a big boat up there. Little River runs right behind Hilldale Cemetery. You're not putting any type of boat, even back in the day.
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So when you go back and look at it from that perspective, you almost rule out, again, unless we have somebody that's listening can clear this up for us, you almost rule out they did not bring that kind of stone structure of materials up the river, that they had no transportation for that. So if you eliminate that, then where did they come from? If they came from a quarry, then you have the same question. How far away was the quarry from American Stonehenge?
Right.
What kind of topographical geography did they have to cross with that? And then comes down the question, how did they do it? Did they drag it with animals? Did they drag it with humans? And it keeps going back, Tom, to if they didn't, then it had to be an unknown source that did it for them. I mean, I don't think that there's any question it's either or.
Right.
Right? I mean, if we want to prove alien involvement, I think there's a very strong case for that. Very strong case for that. But I'm biased. If you want to prove non-alien involvement, I think you have a case, but a tougher case to prove.
Right.
Right?
Correct.
I mean, you can't take a ton.
Right. Sorry about that, Bob. Continue.
That's okay. You can't take a ton and move it up hills, down hills, over terrain with just human strength. I mean, it would take way too many people to do that, because the pyramids prove that. Either you believe that hundreds of thousands of slaves worked on the pyramids, or the pyramids were designed and helped built by an alien race. I mean, there's only two ways to believe that.
Right. Exactly.
Because they are a structure. They're not like you and I when we do paranormal investigative work. We don't always see the spirit of the ghost.
No, I mean, we don't.
It's what I call belief, without evidence. We know they're there. We have voices. We have shadow figures and so forth. But the pyramids, we have no way to do that. We just can't go back in time and see that.
Right. Correct. So here's a little bit of tidbit for you.
Yeah.
There's this place called Turtle Mound in Andover. Okay.
Say it again?
Turtle Mound.
Okay.
All right. It's 70 feet by 30 feet by 15 feet. On the inside, there are two cave-like chambers, 8 feet in diameter and 10 feet high, and rock-lined tunnel. A study of the structure in 1951, Yale archaeologist Frank Glenn found a layer of human bones mixed with charcoal, indicating the structure was used for ceremonial and cremation purposes.
Yep.
The radiocarbon dating of that charcoal dates back to 2000 BC.
Wow.
He also found spear points and axe heads and hammer stones and drills. He dates back to 3000 BC.
Wow.
So, that's another one of those stones. And I've been to that stone structure myself.
Really?
Yeah, we should go out there one day. It was on private property, but the family gave it to the Andover Recreation, so it's right on their trails.
Yeah. I find it fascinating. I really do, because it really is getting closer to, when you go back 3,000, 4,000, 7,000 years ago, you're getting closer and closer to what may very well be the start of humanity. I mean, you can go way back and say, where did it start? If you're, when we talk to the father in Rhode Island,
right?
I'm sure that he talks, a different timeline than we do.
Correct.
If you talk to me, I would tell you I think aliens have been here forever.
Right.
Frankly, it's a tough subject to have. But on the other side of it is that this is why it's so important for you and I to look at when did Earth become Earth? Let's put aside who created it for now,
right?
And assume it was created by someone or something. Okay.
Correct.
The bottom line, though, is we don't know how old that is.
No, we don't.
So to me, I think there's a cross-check between the age of the Earth, which I've seen things saying 400 million years old. I've seen things saying 75 million years old. But until you have that number, you can't really move forward.
No, you can't. No.
Because the next step after the creation of planet Earth, as we know it today at least, when was the first sign of life? Whether it was a microcosm or not, it's irrelevant. Whether it crawled out of the ocean, it's irrelevant. Whether it was created by a higher being, it's still irrelevant. What was the date of that?
Right.
And I don't think anybody knows that for sure.
No, I don't think they do either.
And that, to me, is, I would love to have the expertise, and I encourage anybody out there that does to give us a call. I would love to get into this project deeper and clear some of that stuff up. And I think all of the experts and supercomputers we have today, and yet nobody can finger point this and say, we know Earth is very close to, give or take, 5,000 years or whatever the number you want to pick is.
Correct. And that's why I find this fascinating. And that's why these stone structures are fascinating, too. And some of them also are paranormal tied to it. We didn't get into that at all, but I'm just saying, one of them was a fort. during King Philip's
Yep.
War. I know somebody who actually channeled at Turtle Mound. I know
Yep.
them personally. I was there when they did it. It wasn't
Yeah.
me. It was somebody else. I'm not going to mention names, but,
Yep.
you know, I mean,
Now, Tom, let me ask
Yeah.
you, because you're familiar with this. Can you go to Stonehenge American Stonehenge as a visitor and do any kind of archaeology type tests and so forth?
no, you'd have to get permission from Dennis.
Okay.
And I
Well,
wouldn't
that's fine.
suggest people do that anyhow, because you don't want to. If people don't know what they're doing, it easily will mess up a site.
Destroy evidence
Yeah.
and everything else. Sure. No, I get that. That's why I mentioned that. It's just interesting whether or not these places allow anything like that.
No, not really. I mean, you could take pictures in there and stuff.
Yeah. And again, I would love to do a podcast out at American Stonehenge if they would like to get in touch with us about doing a live broadcast from there sometime later in the summer when we're set up to do that. Send an email to paranormalnh@yahoo.com, and that really goes for any historical society in the area or in
Right.
basically New England. If you would like
Exactly.
us to come out and do things like this, even in the way of a fundraiser, let us know. You'll pick up 100% of whatever you raise. You run the fundraising part of that. Tom and I run the event part of it. So, again, paranormalnh@yahoo.com.
Yes, and wow, Bob, we've come to an end of another great show. Whew.
Did a great job, Tom.
Thank you. So next week we'll have
know-
somebody else on.
Well, I want to take a second and have our listeners realize what a gift you are to the world of paranormal, but also how knowledgeable you are and sharing you are when it comes to history. You really are a gift to that project, frankly, and we should all thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Bob. I do appreciate that. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, my friend.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in this week from England across the lake to Florida to California. Good luck to my friends and family out in California. Prayers out there. A little odd stuff going on out there that's not paranormal but scary. Our friends north in Canada and our friends across the world, thanks for tuning in tonight. Have a good evening. This is the Paranormal Zone. This is Tom the Crypt Keeper heading back to the crypt. Good day, everybody, or
Good night,
good night.
all.
Good night.